Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. The first story. My best friend took me to an abandoned hospital. I've been an avid Reddit user over a multitude of accounts for the past few years. I either lose passwords, create a throwaway, or even just made a theme account, but that's not the point of why I'm posting this. I know Reddit well, and I know that this is the place to take my story, and hopefully get some insight. I began my life in a tiny community somewhere in the Midwest. The name is mostly unimportant, because it is no more than a stain on any map you'd try to find it on. It's the typical nothing ever happened, everything was boring kind of life, that is, until I was in high school. The proud life of being a Badger was little more than a joke in the surrounding areas. We lost every sports game, had a terrible music program, and we cancelled any pep rally ever planned. Nobody wanted to go there, but we all had to, considering in the rural Midwest you don't find many schools close together. But like I had mentioned previously, high school is where this all began, specifically with my friend Thomas. Now Thomas was at the forefront of what it meant to be an all-American sports player. He was the only athletic person at the school, and he played every sport he could. He was also extremely popular, which meant that, as a quiet, socially awkward nerd, I was popular by association. He was also part skeptic, part frat boy, and part thrill seeker. When I say this, I mean that all he did was party, drink, do drugs, and go on crazy-ass adventures. Looking back, he literally had what they call the high school dream, and I'm still not sure why he wanted to do what we did. It was sometime in the fall, roughly 20 years ago, when Thomas made his fateful decision. I know it was fall because I remember seeing all of the changes around me, like the leaves to vibrant colors and the weather to something with a bit more chill. We'd been hanging out for the whole day, when Thomas got the idea that it would be cool to go visit an old abandoned hospital that sat outside of our town. Now, I know what you're thinking: haunted hospital, spooky specter. Bear with me, this isn't as simple as a middle school campfire story. Thomas was one of the only kids around who had a car, so while driving around, he had decided that the hospital would be a thrilling experience, so off we went, and he didn't even so much as ask me what I thought, or take into consideration my opinion on the matter. The life of the popular kid's wingman, I suppose. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I'm kind of a PC, I don't watch horror movies, hell, I even shy away from the commercials. However, I've always loved no sleep, and whether that be some sort of morbid fascination or embedded love of the macabre, I don't really know. But needless to say, I was trying to play it cool in front of Thomas while absolutely shitting my pants. We arrived at the hospital in the late hours of the night, my best guess would be between midnight and 3. This place had been closed and boarded up for years, over the premise that a doctor who was murdered by a patient with multiple personalities. It's the typical ghost story where you hear, and that doctor still haunts this hospital, to this very day. That happened close to 60 years ago, and the place still stands and is avoided to this day, except for the occasional teenager or two looking to make a name for themselves. We roll up on this place and the first thing Thomas does is park in an immensely awkward spot. Like, there's no way we could peel out if shit hit the fan. I let it happen. I thought to myself, it's just an old building. What could actually go wrong? Ghosts are fake, and nobody is going to be living in a place like this, no matter how desperate they are. As we go inside, the only sentence that I can still use to explain what we saw is the first thing that Thomas said upon entering: WTF. The main lobby was absolutely horrendous. We knew about the murder of the doctor, it's why we went in the first place, but we weren't expecting what we saw. The entire main lobby was a bloodstain. The chairs, the ceiling, the floor, the walls. Everything was dried and brown, but there was no denying that it was blood, no matter how much my mind wanted to rationalize it. I wanted to turn around right then, but Thomas was no bitch, and he intended to explore the entire place for what he called proof, and what I called notoriety. I had my doubts instantly. There was no way that this place had only seen the murder of a doctor. There was blood covering almost every inch of this place, and this was only the main lobby. I kept my thoughts to myself, because I knew Thomas would only ridicule me. God, I wish I had said something now. We followed the signs as best we could to reach the psych ward. Out of all of the places, Thomas wanted to go to the place that would still be scary if this place was functioning. As the good sidekick that I was, I followed him anyway, once again not voicing any kind of my concerns. The journey through the hospital was different. We saw some really creepy looking rooms, with tools still laid out as if they had been dropped in the middle of use and never picked up again. Thomas walked into one of the rooms and happened to step on glass, completely cutting open the bottom of his foot. While I personally would have curled into a ball and probably begged until we left, Thomas just ripped his shirt apart like Hulk F-King Hogan and tied it around his foot, but not before he'd lost quite a bit of blood there on the floor. We set off again, albeit a bit slower this time around. The rest of the walk was truly uneventful. We saw more rooms that looked as if the doctors and patients got up in the middle of operation and left everything where it was. There were chairs with dried blood, and tools that looked to have some kind of material left on them, which I can only assume is from operation. The scariest part of the hospital wasn't what we saw, necessarily, it was what we had to guess. What happened that made these people abandon their rooms in the middle of looks to be an operation? Surely it would have been difficult to get a patient out of there. I kept all of these thoughts to myself, and they really did begin to build up an overwhelming sense of dread in my gut. We set off again, towards the psych ward. As soon as we hit the doors to the psych ward, my stomach turned and I felt as if I was going to vomit. Even Thomas, who either had the heftiest set of balls ever or was at least stupid enough to not fear anything, hesitated at what we saw. The door was boarded completely over, and all that was there to even identify it as the psych ward was a note that looked to be in either a child's handwriting, or somebody who has trouble writing. The note wasn't a piece of paper, but on the boards themselves, and it read, "Stay out," in what appeared to be fresh blood. Thomas and I both looked down at his still bleeding foot, and then back to the door. My vision began to swim and my head was pounding. The last thing I saw before blacking out was Thomas touching the boards. I don't really know if I can describe what happened later as waking up. It was more like coming into being. I wasn't in pain, fatigued, dizzy, nothing. There was no sign of anything relating to a fall. As someone who has a history of fainting, that was weird to me. The second weird thing I noticed was that I was no longer in the hallway outside of the psych ward, and I wasn't laying down. I awoke standing up in the middle of an operation room, with, once more, the sight of dilapidated surgical tools. How do I get here? Where was Thomas? Nothing seemed to make sense. The third realization is what really triggered my fight or flight instincts. I was standing in a small puddle of blood, with no sign of injury on my own body. I did what any terrified high school student would do and noped the FCK out of that room as quickly as I could. Looking back on that, maybe I should have waited for Thomas, maybe I should have talked him out of coming, maybe I should have looked around the room before I ran out. I ran as far and as long as I could through the winding hospital halls until I was out of breath. As I knelt over myself, coughing and wheezing to catch my breath, I heard what I can only describe as the sound of pure agony. It was as if hell itself had opened up and all of the screams of the damned escaped at once for only a short amount of time, and it came from the direction I'd been running from. I knew then and there that it was Thomas, and I took off again, back into the winding halls of the hospital. As I ran, the only thoughts that came into my mind were that he'd either fallen on equipment or down some stairs or something. I refused to admit that this place was actually haunted, and I certainly didn't believe that whatever was happening was linked to the supernatural. I heard another blood-chilling scream, and only mere seconds later, my vision swam, my stomach dropped, and I was out. I awoke standing up. I awoke in a pool of blood. I awoke with rusty tools in my hands. I awoke wearing scrubs. I awoke in the same room I had before. And I awoke standing over the dismembered body of Thomas, hours after I had blacked out. I can't say that I know what happened, but I left the hospital, and I went home. I didn't feel panicked, or rushed, or anything. All I felt was an eerie sense of calm as I made my way out of the hospital. I called the cops and told them we'd gone there, and that I lost Thomas when we split up to examine some rooms. I didn't tell them anything else. Nothing about blacking out, nothing about the rooms, nothing about finding him. I filed it as a missing person, but that he was definitely still inside of the hospital. They found him beyond the boarded-up psych ward walls, which still makes me wonder how I got out of there. Nobody in the town blamed me, suspected me, or hated me. I was, to them, just as much of a victim as Thomas was. I never left this town, even after everything that happened. I couldn't. My life was here, and while it may just be a stain in the middle of nowhere, it's all I've ever really known. I still faint, and I always wake up in the same area where it happens, right there on the ground like a regular fainting spell. Well, almost always. I wake up at that old hospital sometimes, standing up in some random ward or lobby or room, wearing scrubs. But this only happens on the days when my son comes home from school and tells me some of his classmates are going to the hospital.